Okay, so in this example, I'm going to take a simple program with an array. And right now, you can see there's 6 elements in the array. And we ask the hours worked by 6 employees, and we read that in a for loop, and then we display it back out. So our input data comes from the user. So I'm just going to put in, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and it's going to just display that information. So now what I want to happen is I want this data to come from an input file instead of the user. So I am going to do 2 things. I'm going to create an input file that has the data in it, and then I'm going to update this program so it will then utilize the input file. So when using Dev C++, you really have to use Notepad to create your input files. So I'm going to create this input file in Notepad, and then I'm going to explain where it needs to be saved in order for Dev C++ to find it. Okay, so all I did was open up Notepad, and I'm going to put the data in here. Now, it just has to be separated by white space characters, so I could put it on one line separated by spaces, or I can put it on separate lines. Either way, it's going to work. And I'm going to save this file, so I'm going to do a save as. And what I need to do is I need to look on my desktop. I have a folder here called CS2 files, and that is where I'm working right now. Now, if I change this to all files, you'll see this is where my source code is, my array example.cpp. I'll change that back to text documents, and I'm going to call this file employee hours, and I'm just going to save it. It's going to put an extension of .txt out there, but I'm just going to show you that these files have to really be in the same location. So here you can see I opened up in my my File Explorer. I'm sorry. This is my source code, array example.cpp, my executable file, and here's that little text file that I created. You want to have them all in the same location. All right, so now I'm going to go back here to my source code. Okay, and I am going to add in the code that I need for the input file. So I'm going to include fstream, that's what I need for files. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create an input file. So I'm going to create an input file stream. In this case, I'm just going to call this input file. I can call that whatever I want. That's just going to be my input file stream variable. And now I need to open the file, and the name of the file that I just created is employeehours.txt. And whenever you're working with input files, you really should have some type of error check in here to make sure that the file was opened properly. Because if you don't have an error check and your program doesn't work, you don't know if it's because it can't find the file or just because it doesn't work. Okay, so a simple way to do this is I'm just going to say if, I can say not input file. So if it finds the file, this will set a flag to true. It's just the name of the file stream. But and then if we put a not in front of it, so if it's true, not true is false, and it'll bypass my whole if statement. But if it doesn't find the file, this guy will be false, not false is true, and then it'll execute the code. So I'm just going to put an error message here, which states I cannot find your input file. And then I'm going to use an exit function. Exit -1 just exits right out of the program. Since I'm in main here, I could say return if I wanted to, but I'm just going to use exit here. Okay, so now we're going to read from the file. And when we read from the file, you know, we could use a for loop that goes through 6 times, but that's not really the best thing to do, because what if we have 7 things in our input file, or 8 things, or 9 things? We want to really set this up so that it'll read from the file until we reach the end of file marker. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use a while loop. Okay, so while I have not reached the end of file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the values and I'm going to store them in the array. So I'm going to read those from my input file and I'm going to store them in my array. And I'm going to use the same syntax that I did down here, hours sub count. Okay. Now, I do need to have this counter that's going to count how many things are in my array. So I'm going to start it at 0 since I'm using this while loop here. And then every time I read one in, I'm going to increment my counter. Okay. All right. Now, I don't need to prompt the user. I don't need the for loop here. And then I'm going to say the hours you entered are. Now I'm going to change this for loop around a little bit. Well, maybe I'm going to leave it as it is. If I look up here, okay. I think I'm just going to kind of set up my own for loop because I'm using count as a counter here and I'm using it for my for loop. So I'm just going to kind of set up a new for loop. Okay. So basically what's going to happen is this for loop, and I'll just use I as my index into the array. So this is going to go through count times. Now this is going to keep track of how many things are in there. Right now my current input file has 6 things. So it'll read this into index 0 and then this will become 1 and it'll read the next one into index 1 and 2 and 3. Okay. And then I'm just going to see out hours sub I. Okay. All right. Now, the reason I just changed the name of the loop counter is because up here I'm using this as a counter variable to count how many things are in my input file. So when I go through my for loop down here, I have to use a different variable name. All right, so I'm going to run this now. And here you see the hours you entered are, and then they're all displaying. So I put an endl here. Maybe I'm just going to put a space, which I think is what I had before. All right. I'm just going to clean things up a tiny bit here. Just put a little space there. That just looks a little bit nicer. Okay, so I'm reading it in from the file. Now, the situation that I have currently in my input file is that I have 6 things, and I'm kind of limited by this number 6 here because that's as big as my array is. So why don't we make it a maximum size, like the maximum number of employees I might have, let's say, is 25. So now my array is bigger. If I make this array bigger, this code is still going to run, right? The only difference is that I don't have to have 6. I can have any number of employees up to 25. So I can open up my file here and I can put in some more hours. Okay, and I'm going to save this. And just note, when you're working with these input files, you want to make sure you don't have any blank lines at the end, because that's going to cause problems. So make sure you end right here, maybe hit the delete key a few times. That'll put that end of file marker right where you need it. And now I'm going to run this program again. And you can see now it has that new data in it. So this version is much more flexible when we read this in from the input file, and using a while loop that tests for the end of file marker and then display the information back out. I just want to demonstrate how this error check will work here. Right? I don't have a file with that name, so it just says I cannot find your input file. So putting a simple error check in like that will save you lots of time in finding problems later on.